Interval 6. Tips and tricks. When learning to identify and write intervals, counting semitones and using the interval table is ultimately slow. This lesson shows some tips and tricks to facilitate speedy interval recognition. Imagine that the distance between the floor to the ceiling in the room you are in represents an interval. If you raise the ceiling, the interval becomes larger. If you lower the ceiling, the interval becomes smaller. Similarly, if you raise the floor, the interval becomes smaller, and if you lower the floor, the interval becomes larger. Without changing the distance portion of the interval, the size can be decreased by lowering the top note or by raising the bottom note. When the quality of a major interval is decreased by one semitone, it becomes minor. When the quality of a minor interval is decreased by one semitone, it becomes diminished. Similarly, without changing the distance, the size of the interval of the major third from C to E can be increased by raising the top note or by lowering the bottom note. When the quality of a major third is increased by one semitone, it becomes augmented. The qualities of modal intervals, that is seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths, can be raised or lowered according to the fulcrum from smallest to largest, diminished to minor to major to augmented. Similarly, the qualities of tonal intervals, that is unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves, can be raised or lowered according to the fulcrum from smallest to largest, diminished to perfect to augmented. For example, consider the perfect fifth from D to A. You can make it diminished by lowering the top note or raising the bottom note. Or you can make it augmented by raising the top note or lowering the bottom note. Tonal intervals can be raised or lowered according to the fulcrum from smallest to largest, diminished to perfect to augmented. The quality fulcrums for tonal and modal intervals are summarized in this table. Commit them to memory to improve your interval recognition. When the notes in an interval are both sharped or both flatted, the interval can be identified as if it has no accidentals. G to B is a major third. Therefore, G flat to B flat is a major third, and G sharp to B sharp is a major third. This is because the flats lower both notes the same amount, and the sharps raise both notes the same amount, keeping the interval size the same. We previously learned key signatures and major scales. This example shows an E-flat major scale. Every note in a major scale makes an interval with the tonic below. All of the intervals are either perfect or major. The tonal intervals, that is the unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves, are all perfect, and the modal intervals, that is the seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths, are all major. This pattern is the same for every major scale. Regardless of the key or context of the music, you can imagine that the bottom note in an interval represents a tonic of a key. Then, if the top note is in that imagined key, it will be a perfect or a major interval from the bottom note. If the top note is not in that imagined key, then you can find the quality with the quality fulcrums you learned earlier in this lesson. Consider the interval from E to C. C is a sixth above E. Temporarily imagine that you are in the key of the lower note, which is E major. C sharp is in the key of E major, so C sharp is a major sixth above E. Using the quality fulcrums we learned earlier in this lesson, it can be seen that lowering the C sharp to a C natural decreases the sixth by one semitone. Therefore, E to C natural is a minor sixth. Using this method works in most situations, but there may be no key that corresponds to the bottom note. For example, there is no such key as D sharp major. As you become fluent in reading music in intervals, you will be able to quickly identify intervals regardless of such circumstances.